Hello, I'm Dr. Sandra Cosgrove, a history professor at the College of Southern Nevada and executive director of Vote Nevada, a small nonprofit with the tagline Solving Problems Through Civics. Today, I would like to look at Nevada's election, because we're in election year, in 2022. So, what types of elections do we have each election cycle? The first is called the primary. What is the purpose of a primary? First, in Nevada, we decide who moves forward to the general election. So in many races, we're saying, okay, we want 2 or 3, or we decide how many. We decide which of those people who are running we want to move forward to the general election. We also, however, elect candidates in our open primary races. In Nevada, if you look at races like, for instance, the sheriff's race in Clark County, that is an open primary race where all the candidates run together on one ballot and every voter gets to vote. In this instance, in June of 2022, because one candidate, Kevin McMahill, got more than 50% of the vote, he was elected to that office. This means that the sheriff's race is done. It will not show up on the general election ballot. This is why it's extremely important for Nevadans to participate in the primary, because in our open primary races, we actually can elect people if they get more than 50% of the vote. So then what types of primaries do we have? We have 2 that run concurrently. We have open primary, where all candidates are on one ballot and every voter can participate. This includes our judicial branch of government. So everybody running for judge will be on an open primary ballot. We also have city council, we have school board, we have board of regents. So we have one branch of government, and a lot of local races are open primary. Simultaneously, we also have a closed primary for the federal races, for the executive branch races, and for the legislative branch races. So if their person is running for the Senate at the federal level, or for the House of Representatives, or for governor, or lieutenant governor, or for a member of our legislature, those are closed primaries. And the candidates from the political parties vie for the party's endorsement. Only affiliated voters can participate. So in those races, if you're registered as a Democrat, you get a ballot that lists all the Democratic candidates in those races, in addition to the open nonpartisan races. If you're a Republican, you see all the people who are running for those top of the ticket executive, federal, legislative branch races, and all of the nonpartisan races. If you're a nonpartisan or third-party registrant, you do not get to participate in those races. So you don't get to participate in the primary for the federal races, for the executive branch, or for the legislative branch. Well, then who decides which type of primary that a state has? Who ultimately decided that we would have some of our races be open primary and some would be closed? Ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a court case out of Washington State in 2008, decided it's the voters who get to decide. And voters can do it through their elected representatives in their legislature or through a ballot question. And so voters can decide, do we want to have all open primary? Do we want to have all closed primary? Do we want to have a hybrid? But it's ultimately the power lies with the voters. What role do the political parties play? They can use the primary to decide which candidates to endorse if that's what voters have decided that the publicly financed primaries will be used for. But if voters say, no, we do not want the political parties, which are private organizations, using the primary for their endorsement process, then the political parties have to use some other means or a different method for deciding their endorsements. They can use a caucus, they can have a convention, they can do a mail-in vote. But if voters decide we're just going to do open primary, and the primary is just for voters to decide who's going to move forward, then the political parties have to find another way to decide who they're going to endorse. And again, the U.S. Supreme Court made that decision back in 2008 out of a court case from Washington State. Then what is the election called that we have in November? That would be the second type of election, and that's usually referred to as the general election. So that again happens in November of the election cycle. In Nevada, we have early voting 2 full weeks, so our election technically starts in the middle of October, but election day is in November. So what is the purpose then of the general election? It's to elect candidates to office. We decide who's going to be the elected official. Decide the fate of ballot questions. Will they pass or will they not? And it ends the election cycle. So once we get through the general election and the election results are announced, that election cycle ends. All voters are allowed to participate in the general election. We don't ask what your party affiliation is. We don't say that some voters can participate and other voters don't. In the general election, all voters get to participate. Who decides what the general election looks like? Now, unlike the primary election, there are federal laws, there's federal case law or court rulings, and there are state laws that determine what the general election must look like. Voters also get to have some say through their elected representatives and through ballot questions. For instance, voters can adopt early voting or voters can adopt mail-in voting. There's different mechanisms for how the process plays out, but unlike the primary election, the general election is much more tightly controlled by federal law as far as who is allowed to vote and case law or court rulings about how an election must be managed and who gets to participate so that no one is discriminated against. Thank you for listening to my explanation of the election process. Again, this is Dr. Sandra Cosgrove. I'm a history professor with the College of Southern Nevada, and I'm the executive director of Vote Nevada, because we can solve problems by learning civics. If you need more information, we have a website, we have a blog with a lot of resources, or you can email me at info@votenevada.org. Please also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you.